I'm going to let the gentlemen introduce themselves. I know you know everybody knows everybody. And I thank you so much. We've been looking forward to the program. Thank you.
We're happy to be here. Welcome to all of you historians and athletic supporters. I would like to mention to you that my voice is not too good, but it's better than your microphone. Can we have the eighth man, Sam? Thank you very much. At Rotary today, Sam, Jerry Ream commented, are you going to feed the crowd tonight? To which I responded, we'll check into that. I called the Dutch Mill Village cater this gathering for you, and was told that it was closed for renovation. We have no competition tonight with presidential debates, and that will be a relief. And I would like to mention that a good number of years ago, we named Lee, my son Lee, as the operating marketing manager for the team of 42. He's done a great job. When he saw about this gathering tonight, he was somewhat alarmed because he was afraid there would not be enough room. But he said, because of the past involvements, I'm sure that the plant board will be happy to use their internet connection and film this for the overflow crowd at the plaza. And I hear you're going to have a program there only next month. That's great. We're thinking the same way. Sometime after Sam called regarding this gathering tonight, I thought of Charlie Bowles, who once told me, by the time you're my age, all of your adversaries are dead, or any living won't probably remember what you're talking about. During camps, 7 years in Glasgow, he lived at the Bohannon House on Brown Street below Liberty Street School. This property was later bought by and renovated by Charlie, which I have brought up to you only to tie him into the program because I want to tell a story about it. Charlie was a great character. He always brought some fond memory. For example, the night our telephone rang at home, and it was Margaret Rich's daughter who wanted to know if I would be free to talk to her mother about a very important matter. Well, I wasn't usually accustomed to counseling, but Margaret had something serious on her mind. She started by saying, "You know Mr. Charlie Bowles?" I said, "Quite well." She said, Charlie had, since his wife's death, taken with him to the pancake fries, the fish suppers, and other civic gatherings, some 3 or 4 with us as his guests, but I had never seen Margaret in the mix. She continued, "What would you think about me marrying Mr. Charlie Bowles?" I said, "When might you be thinking about this? Does Charlie know about it?" "Well, we thought maybe tomorrow," she said. "Margaret, how old are you?" She says, "I'm 67, and Mr. Bowles is 82. I said, "Well, I think that would be wonderful, and I would certainly give you my blessing, but I hope you will be careful and don't get pregnant." The set the tone for the night, let us remind you that we grew up in a different age, but looking over this crowd, I believe most of you were there. I have several classmates here from high school. I have wondered, well, I won't say how many, but a few of you probably didn't get out of high school. To set the tone for the night, let us remind you that we grew up in a different age, which survived the aftermath of the Great Depression. All young people wanted a job. I went to Houchins at age 15, talked to Mr. Houchins, who advised me that I would have to have a Social Security number, and I would have to be 16. The Saturday after that birthday, I was back at Houchins and had my job. I was going to work at 8:30, off 9:30 or 10, stocked the shelves, swept the floor, cleaned the window in the front, and helped customers. I was a many-duty employee for which I received $1.50 a day. I kept that job, and a year and a half later was lured by Gene Abel to come down to Lerman's and make $2.25. I got a 50% increase in pay right there. With the introduction of sports injuries that I seem to have acquired, sprains and gains, I refer to them, with a sprained left ankle 6 times in 1 year, I think 1941. I felt somewhat like an authority as to treatment. Over-the-counter liniments, I used all of them. My friends were giving me home remedies, such as mud packs with red clay or brown paper sacks soaked in vinegar, heat for sprains over 24 hours. And then I made a couple of trips to the team doctor, whose office was on the north side of the square, 24 steps up, and I could hardly make the climb. Another day and time for practice, out for football. Coach Camp never failed to ask me how I was feeling. And I said, Coach, my ankle is killing me. And he always felt like he saw greatness in my potential. And he would respond the same way. Better take about 6 laps around the field and loosen that thing up. Like all of my teammates, he was the final word. Since some of us at age 10 had watched Hitler conquer Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, and our generation would have the responsibility to meet the challenge to defend the free world, and soon after counter the threat of communism, either here or on foreign soil. It was without doubt that the most serious time in the history of man, during which we would make lifetime decisions regarding the direction of our lives. We were ready to face the unknown future, filled with challenge, threat, and opportunity. Tonight, we are honored to be your guests. I'm delighted to present to you the memory of what we recall as one of the most outstanding football teams in the history of Glasgow High School. The 3 of us represent the survivors of that great undefeated team of 42. 2 others we should mention who were instrumental in our success include Coach Frank Camp and tailback Joe Tribune, both of whom have been inducted into the Glasgow High Hall of Fame. Joe Tribune is still surviving with some impairments in Louisville, and doesn't like to make the 100-mile trip to Glasgow. The one who gave us leadership sufficient to keep us together from in those days and till today was none other than our team's captain, the great E.F. Smith, who will lead off tonight. I will endeavor to relate some detail as to the games played, and Winston, a winner in football and basketball, will recap the Hopkinsville game, I think, and if he doesn't, I will. And close the season as he sees fit, with highlights of what's referred to as the mythical champions of 1942. Captain Smith.
Okay. That's quite an introduction.
Best one you've had.
I appreciate very much the Historical Society for gathering here tonight to record this and to put this on paper of some kind. You know, if people had done this several years ago, it would have been a more acceptable thing today. But of course, back then, we didn't have the recorders and the film and all to do that with. I don't want to take up too much time talking about details, because we simply don't have the time we get the film and all. So I'm just going to hit some of the highlights on it, but I did want to tell you about the first two football games that was played in Glasgow. They were played, one of them was played November the 15th, 1919. The other one was played a week later. The first one was played, they didn't put the score. Malcolm Black here at the Glasgow Daily paper didn't put he wrote up the game, but he didn't put the score in there. And it's understandable why he didn't put it in there. It was Hill Nail 54, Glasgow zip. The next week was November the 22nd, and they had Bowling Green, Ogden College High School came here to play the second game. The second game was played and written up the same way. They didn't put the score in it. Some of the nosy fans got around some way or other and found out what the score was, and it was Bowling Green 107. Glasgow zip. Now it's easy to understand right there why people would say the heck with football. We're not going to go that route. But they didn't do that. The fans were very enthusiastic about it. So I'm not going to take up too much time doing that. I'm coming on down now. But for the next 8 or 10 years, Glasgow had a pretty good team in between there. And in 1929, the Glasgow team, they were known as the Blue Warriors. They played the 1929 season. They played 10 games. They won all 10 of the games. And as a result of that, they had the option to select who they wanted to play in the playoffs. And they selected Fort Myers High School, and they played at Western Kentucky University Stadium down there on November the 30th, 1929. It was interesting how they won that game. I don't want to waste time, but Fort Thomas had the ball on their 6-yard line. They had to get it out of there. They could either run it out, kick it out, or pass it out. They chose to kick it out. They kicked the ball, and over here on the left side of Glasgow's defensive team was a young man, oddly enough, named Edwin Smith. What's his name? He took off with no regard for his own safety, threw the line, went down, blocked the kick. And then Howard Pete, some of y'all knew Howard Pete, a lot of you knew Howard. He came down here from Chicago when he was just a kid and they got him out in football. But he took off running and fell on the ball. And that made 6 more points for Glasgow. They were 6 and 6. That made them 11 and 6. And they kicked the extra point and made the extra point and won the game by 13-6. There was a big carry-on about that. Western Kentucky had a big banquet, and all the high school college coaches were there looking for players and so forth. So they really got a lot out of that. That was in 1929. From 1929 till 1935, things were completely different. If you remember, and some of y'all are old enough to remember that, most of you not, but in 1929, the New York stock market went bang. The bottom fell out of it. It was the start of the Depression for 1931, 32, 33, and 34. And so things got real bad. The board got down, the coaches got down, the players got down. They cut the games from 10 games to 5 games. That didn't go over very well. So from 1929 to 1934, they were just up and down. They won some and lost some, but there was a lot of unhappiness. Then in 1935, the board decided they could afford to spend a little more money, and they hired a young coach who was coaching at Hodgenville, Kentucky. His name was Frank Gang. And they got him here in 1935, and he coached 35 teams. From 35, 36, 37, and 38, things weren't all that good either. He had some losing seasons, then he had some winning seasons. But he took over, and from there, that's when most of us came in contact with him, was in 1935. In 1938, there was a young man named Paul Walker that joined the team, and Paul Walker, as you know, was an outstanding athlete. He could do it all. And then I joined the team in 1938. And Paul, his last year to play was 1940. And so he played in the fall of 40, but he didn't graduate until 41. Didn't get his diploma until over in 41. But I remember very well the football banquet in 1941 was held up at the high school, not high school, the church up on the square, the First Christian Church. And I still have a program there of that football banquet. One thing I remember about it, for dessert, they had pumpkin pie with cream. So we all gathered up there. That was December the 5th, 1941. We all gathered. They gave out the letters and so forth, and the speakers did their thing. The next day was the 5th, of course, December the 5th. Some of us worked, and we did whatever we did on December the 5th. And then Sunday, we decided we'd get together, a handful, 4 or 5 of us, and our girlfriends. Marjorie Darley was my girlfriend, lived on Cleveland Avenue. So we went over to her house on Sunday to listen to the big band. Back then, the only entertainment we had was the big band. I mean, big band, 30 and 40 piece band. They were broadcasting from New York. And about 1 o'clock, the program came on. We were listening to the music. We were sitting there probably holding hands naively, wasn't thinking about anything particular. And all of a sudden, they broke in on the program. And we thought, what the devil are they doing breaking in on this fine music? There must be something important, or they wouldn't be stopping the national broadcast. And they came on the radio and said that Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. And what I remember about it, I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. And I don't think any of us, we found out that day though, before sundown, where it was. We just thought, well, Pearl Harbor is a little old country, it's got trigger happy and so forth. But we found out later on that Sunday that it was a naval base in the Hawaiian Islands, is what they attacked. The next day that was December 7th. The next day, of course, was December 8th. We went back to school. We all went down in the auditorium, the whole school, teachers and all. They had a radio up on the stage. They were waiting for President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president, to address Congress. And he did that. And during that address, he declared war on Japan. And when we left there that day, we decided something real serious was taking place. And but we went on back, see, Christmas vacation was coming up. So we went through the Christmas vacation. January the 2nd, we went back to school. And during that time, every radio, newspaper, everything, all they had was about the war. And so then, when we went back to school, after that announcement, we went outside, and I can recall that we were pretty ill about the whole thing. We were pretty upset about it. But anyway, some of us decided, okay, we'll just quit right now and go into service immediately, the seniors, particularly some of the juniors. But fortunately, Coach Kane called us back for a meeting on January the 1st, on January the 2nd, after we'd been home for Christmas, and indicated to us he felt like if the seniors would stay, and of course the war had only been going on 2 or 3 weeks, if the seniors would agree to stay, he felt like we could win the conference that year. So we decided that we would stay for the year 1942. He knew what kind of football team he had. He knew he had a good football team. We had Joe Tribune Jr. as a quarterback, and later was an All-American at the University of Louisville, an outstanding player. And during that year, he had got back most of the seniors from the year before. Robert Lessenberry was one end, Luke Staples was the other end. And I am still amazed today at how that football team reacted. You cannot imagine anybody being any more patriotic than that group was. I believe they would have taken off if they could right then and gone into the war. But they stayed for the 42 season. So how am I doing, Robert, time-wise?
You've got till 8 o'clock.
But I did want to go back and if I had time, and mention a few things that happened back. This was in 1923 when this incident happened, and Freddie Travis was quarterback on the team. I'm kidding, Freddie back there somewhere. But in 1923, Glasgow played Hillvale High School for the 2nd or 3rd time. Hillvale had beaten them to death 3 or 4 times. And they finally won a game 12-0. And like Coach Kane, they had a lot of trick plays. And one of the trick plays they used on that team was, you'll have to appreciate what our helmets were like. They was made of pigskin, but it was just a bonnet like that slipped down on your head. It didn't have any chin strap on it. It protected your ears. And that was about it. I mean, there was very little padding in it. Probably back then, we all went around with concussions and didn't even know. Anyway, that's what it's about. the center for Glasgow's team centered the ball back to the quarterback. He reared back like he was gonna throw it. Standing right next to him was a tailback. That tailback all of a sudden flicked his helmet off and drew back and threw that helmet all behind the feet. Well, the opposing team, as soon as they saw that, they all took off. And one of their star quarterbacks on their team fell on the helmet. In the meantime, here's our quarterback standing up here with a ball in his hand. He takes off down the sideline and goes 30 yards. He didn't go for a touchdown, but he went for the 30 yards down the sideline. And it was written up in the paper, and they criticized Glasgow because they were unethical and all that sort of thing. That's one of the things that happened, which is amusing to me. But anyway, we got back to the 42 team, and so I'm going to let R.A. Lessenberry tell you about what happened with the 42 team. And so he'll take care of that part of it. Thank you very much for listening. You were real
When we were waiting for that radio to be delivered to the chapel that morning in 1941, well, whenever the war started, they would play patriotic music, and every male in chapel would stand 10 feet tall and would be ready to go at any moment. Numbers of young people from the 40 participants in football in 1940. We had 22 in 1942. Some of them had gone to military school, some had dropped out, some had volunteered for the service. But if you looked at our group, I was pretty heavy left in at 150 pounds, a lot better than I was at 125 when I started. But I guess you'd say camp had some good material to build on. Several months ago I came across a poem which was penned for a team of 42 reunion held about 35 years ago. With your permission, we will attempt to set the mood accordingly for the remainder of the program. Following the summer of 42, we remember our football camp. It was a place we went to practice. It was not a place we went to practice, but a job who made us change. In those days, the war was spreading, the world outlook was bleak, yet inspiration and desire made each of our runners streak. Our interference was brutal, left the opponents on the ground, passes tossed high into the air were caught with wild abound. With victories over Owensboro, Hopkinsville, Bowling Green, and Town, that's Tompkinsville, jubilation in our dressing room, one seldom saw a frown. There were 22 of us, none of us were really mean. Effort, conditioning, and unity made us an undefeated team. Some may say we were the greatest. Guess that could be our fate. One thing's for sure, there's been no better at Glasgow High to date. Reminisce about the plays you made, talk about the games we won, but remember, give something to this life and make it all worthwhile and fun. In 1940, it looked like Glasgow was going to have a pretty good team. And we started out with 2 participants, Paul Baker and Winston Nunn, broken arms. Shortly after a 20-0 victory over E-Town, Children broke his arm and was was out for 4 games, during which we lost four games. And in a battle with Bardstown, shortly after, George Bertram broke his arm, but he continued to be the kicker in all games thereafter. And like Faye was talking about, some of the scores of yesteryear, in the last year of the season of 41, Glasgow lost at Hopkinsville 55-6. And Thomas Gray, the Hopkinsville running back, raised his season total to 211 points, a state total record. In 1942, speculation was that Glasgow should have a good team since we had all the arms healed and a nucleus of the 41 group. One thing we found before the season was underway, there wasn't any gas, no one had any transportation. How in the world would you get to games? Some hitchhiked, some went in cars with traveling salespersons who would spend some of their gas to take us to games. We used Mary Davis, and I was looking at Mary Bridges Jones here, who wrestled with Mary and me for years in high school, and she was a dear friend, but she would usually drive her car because her father was a doctor and had a C sticker for his gas ration during the week. And I don't remember how much that was, but it doesn't seem like it was much more than 20 gallons a week. And Miss Davis always drove with her foot on the brake, so she took more gas. The South Central Kentucky Conference was disbanded, so there would be no real conference winner. But during the conversation with coaches and the press throughout the state, it was determined unofficially that whatever team finished the year undefeated would be the state champion. It was Thursday afternoon before the Owensboro game. Our usual procedure was to terminate early, pick up rocks on the field for about 30 minutes, and the other end and I would joke with each other about filling up the trenches where we couldn't use the hideout passes. And then most fields throughout this conference were rock and sand and dust. So it was not the most picturesque that you see now, and it was not the most undamaging because you could fall on some of those stones and get pretty well cut up. But this particular afternoon, before the time was up for our rock picking to be discontinued, Coach Camp called the 22 of us over to the bleachers, set us down, said he had had a call from Louisville wanting to know if we would fill an open date for one of the premier Kentucky teams out of Louisville. We voted on that unanimously. The coach said, I'll make you a deal. We're playing Owensboro tomorrow. They've got a good team, and they're a state contender. We beat them, and I'll call Louisville, and we'll accept that game. We did beat Owensboro 19-19. We tied them 19-19 in the spring practice game. And when Dawson Springs High School dropped football, Owensboro picked up Glasgow as a warm-up game in lieu of Dawson Springs. Perhaps Coach Camp began to wonder when the Glasgow kickoff was returned 55 yards and then 31 yards by Owensboro's all-state back John Kennedy. So it didn't look too promising at that time. On the ensuing kickoff, Joe Tribune ran 50 yards in the opposite direction. About 2 plays later, we called the play number 112 pass. And this is what EF was referring to here a minute ago. 112 pass, the ball is centered from, is centered to the tailback, Joe Tribune. Joe Tribune has the option to run the ball into the center of the line, or he can pass off to the blocking back, breaking to the left flank, or he can hold the ball until he gets to the line, jump as high as he can in the air, and throw the ball to the left end. When we ran that play, I was out in the Owensboro backfield, looking around and didn't see a soul near me. And I looked over and watched the ball go through the hands of the blocking back. I rushed back to the huddle and told Joe, if you run that play again and throw it to me, I think I can catch your passes. And he shot him like a bullet. He did that, and fortunately, the pass was caught, and we went ahead 7-6. We ended up winning that game 20-6, and in that we had beaten a state-ranked team. Everyone got optimistic about the possibility of what might happen next. Many coaches and sports writers around the state agreed that we were among those with the possibility of a state championship. In early October, we played in the second game against the would-be conference team, St. Augustine in Lebanon, Kentucky. We romped over them 34-0, and the outstanding lineman of E.F. Smith, the candidate for all-state tackle, and he mentioned to you his age. I wasn't going to do that, but he said he was some years older than several of us, and he is, but we looked upon him as though he was a kind of a father in And if you can imagine him being one of the biggest players on the team, we had one more of his on his other side of the line, a tackle. We called affectionately Hamfad Heiser. And Hamfad lived right next door to where we are right now, which has nothing to do with the story. In addition, C.H. Flowers and I think Bill Ely were the guards. Quinn Sherrill was leading the offense, along with Luke Staples, my counterpart on the other end of the line. I'd just like to mention Luke. Luke is a fellow who volunteered for the Navy as soon as he got out of high school, or maybe before he got out of high school, and was assigned during his service to the Marines. He got out of the Marines, joined the Air Force, served his term in the Air Force, re-up, and then decided he'd had enough and got out of the service. He made a mistake, as some others did, and signed up for the National Guard. And within a matter of months, Luke Staples was in the National Guard. Battalion commander came to me one day and he said, I want to talk to you. He said, I've got to find a place to put Luke Staples. How well do you know him? I said, better than anybody here. And so Luke, for a period of months, served as my driver in Korea. And he and I almost won the war by ourselves. The Bowling Green game was coming up, and we had not beaten Bowling Green since 1929. We won the game in 1936 when Johnny Taylor was played in also in 1940 with Paul Walker. Both of them were all state performers. It's a Bowling Green win would practically assure Glasgow of being in the top contention for a state championship if things continued. In 1940, we had we were so little we didn't participate other than we were out there cold at night, huddling around, keep that wind off the coach so we wouldn't be so cold. And we were practicing a play where the entire team went to the sideline on a timeout. The left end was told to stay on the right side of the ball, and while the huddle was taking place, we were talking and telling the end to go down, and the ball would be down there and catch it. But unfortunately, it didn't work in 1940. But against Bowling Green, as I best remember, and I remember pretty best, we ran that same play, which had been practiced 2 years before, and we had practiced it a few times in the meantime. But the entire team in a timeout huddled around the bench of the Scotties. The ball was out in the middle of the field. When the timeout was over and the team lined up, the end was on the right side of the ball, so that, and the coach had conferred with the official to tell him what was happening, so he would observe all of these things and make sure they were legitimate and according to the rule. So when the huddle was over, the team went back out on the field. The left end stayed on the sideline, in the sideline, and on the right side of the ball, of the line of scrimmage. And the ball was hiked and thrown downfield, and the left end caught that sucker and made the touchdown. Thank you very much. That was the biggest skinning that Glasgow had ever given Bowling Green with a score of 27-0. After that game, we romped over Russellville 55-12, and 12 was more points than any other team had scored on us. And as I remember, we got so far ahead of them, we took out the first team, put in everybody else, and it was against that group that they scored the 12 points. But in all, Glasgow, I think, scored 182 points that year, and the opposing teams combined for 25. After that game, we romped over Russellville for 55-12, and our backfield included Joe Tribune, Joe Wheeler, Edward Albany, George Berkeley, and again led the way with the blocking of those outstanding linemen. We would now have won 4 straight. 2 more would complete the season. And that last one was, next to the last one was going to be Tompkinsville. And you always had to watch Tompkinsville because they would do anything to win a ball game. In basketball, in the gym at Tompkinsville, they had a pot-belly stove, one on each end. And if we figured if anytime we could play a basketball game against Tompkinsville without getting someone severely burned, we had a successful night regardless of the score. But they had discovered a new gimmick for football. Line up the line of scrimmage, rub their hand over the surface of the rock and the dust, and they'd have a handful of dust. When the ball was hiked, dust in your eyes. If you could see a player, you were lucky. I have enjoyed telling some of my Tompkinsville friends of that happening in recent days, and he thought it was humorous, and he admitted it was the truth. When the last game came around, it was reported that Hopkinsville had a 350-pound tackle agile enough to pull out and lead interference for play, which was rather frightening. And we didn't have anybody around. Of course, you didn't go scout teams. You just took your word of what you heard. And that was rumor. You didn't know how many of those were correct. But this particular team had a undefeated season. So if Glasgow could beat Hopkinsville, we would have had an undefeated season, and it looked like the only team in the state with that record. So we were out warming up before the game, and Coach Camp, which rarely happened, came out and looked for me and told me that he had been looking for this 350-pound player. If we played line to line, he would be right opposite where I was. and Coach Camp said, I don't know how agile he is, but we can't take a chance on you getting hurt. And he said, we might start somebody else if we lose the toss and they want to receive the ball. So he said, if that happens, we may start somebody else. And I learned later that the somebody else who would be in the starting position was Bruce Review. And Coach Camp said, Bruce, who was a little fellow, said that he thought he might get mixed up in the legs of that big 300. and if he did, he might trip him, and it wouldn't do any good. We won that game 14-7, and ended up with a record, undefeated, and have been referred to as the mythical champions of 1942. We thank you very much. Give it all you got, Winston.
Don't have much left. Thank you for having us tonight. First of all, I'd like to show this movie, and this is a film that was made by Bruce Astley and shown at the Plaza Theater in the fall of November 1942. And the film was found by the Lessenberries and what's supposed to
Post, Seth Post and his two boys that kept it all these years.
and they came up, found this film, and we had it put on a DVD.
They didn't know what they had in the camp until they opened it 60 years later.
Yeah.
Look at that rock choir we're playing.
There's Faye. There's Faye. There's Faye.
I'm the one falling down.
There's Lou. Are y'all okay? You're 50.
This is where I fall.
Oh, God.
much, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
We just look young.
Yeah, I know. Thank you.
It's your friend.
Bruce Ashby was real good about doing things for the community, and he took these movies and showed them, and he took, I don't know whether, I'm sure several of you saw the picture that was in the paper. He took that, and he took the 43 team, and he took almost every graduating class on the steps of the Old Liberty School. And he was a real contributor to the community. After the season of 42, there was a Louisville doctor had moved to New Mexico, and he was a team doctor for a high school there that had a very successful season. And he called Earl Ruby, the sports director for the Courier Journal, and wanted to arrange a game for a team in Kentucky. And Earl Ruby called Glasgow, and they wanted to play, but due to the wartime travel, it was unable to arrange that game. And also the same with Ashland High School. East-West game was played, and Coach Frank Kemp was the coach for the West, and we had 3 players, and they were all state. Faye Smith was one, or Ed Smith. We all knew him as Faye when in high school. Joe Trevue and George Burton were other 2. And I understand that was a real bad day that day. Faye talked about it still, how cold it was, and snowing and ice, and he really enjoyed it. Most of you saw the movie, saw where several of the players had nicknames, and this was true back in those days, that a lot of the players had nicknames. I think that the one they didn't mention was George Bertram. They called him Indian. He was dark complected and had real dark hair, and he was cut real short. And like Pat Heiser and Monk Trevue and Luke Stables, all these, a lot of them had nicknames. Another thing is, almost, as far as I know, every player went into the service. Pardon me, and served during the war. Another thing, there were 3 of the team players went on to coach. Joe Trevue was the coach assistant coach at the University of Louisville. George Bertram, he was at Southern High School in Louisville for several years. And Gwen Sherrill, I believe coached at Madisonville or maybe.
I think it was.
Inez.
One of them.
But 3 of them turned out to be coaches. I know that Robert talked about how the helmets were. Well, the uniforms weren't much better. The pads weren't real good. The shoes, we had cleats that were about that big and about that big around.
Inside and out.
They come through that. That's right. But we made out. And he talked about the travel. Another thing, Bruce Astley was awful good about using his, he had it was almost like a truck, but it was open in the back and had a little rail down the edge. And I know in '43, well, he drove that to Hopkinsville, and the players rode in that van, and we all sat along the side of on that railing from here to Hopkinsville. I end the program, but I want to let you know that we'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
I'd like to make a comment.
Well, go ahead, you make it.
He's not telling you all the story. He was an all-state player in high school. And after the war was over, Coach Camp came and got him, took him to the University of Louisville to play football. And before that, he spent a little time down in the Pacific Ocean at a place called Saipan with a rifle on his shoulder in the Marine Corps. I get emotional when I talk about that. But he is an outstanding football player, an outstanding citizen. He's just too modest to tell you about it.
What was Robert Lessenberry's nickname? Everybody else thinks.
Scrum.
Thank you, Jerry.
What?
I was Bobby from the day I was born until I came home from service. And I was here on this street when your father came to Glasgow before he even thought about you.
We talked about him earlier. Any other questions? Comments?
Now, was Mary Davis a cheerleader or
Everybody here had her in high school.
Oh, I know. I didn't know if she was part of the team.
Well, she was part of it, really. She drove us a lot.
Did she have a boyfriend? Did Miss Davis, why did she go to the game? Did she have a boyfriend?
Miss Davis have a boyfriend?
Kidding.
Yes. All the boys in high school were her boyfriend. She was very partial to the boys.
And continued to be many years.
Miss Davis taught English forward, made everyone in high school learn Chaucer. And as we picked up our grade cards after our junior year, I heard 2 young ladies talking about someone was gonna have summer school over on Cleveland Avenue. And I said, who's having summer school? We never did have it before. And then whoever was talking told me. I said, what are they gonna teach? They said, English 4. I said, don't care who's teaching, sign me up. I want to get out of Mary Davis's school. Mary Lloyd's class had a class reunion 100 years later. And Kenneth McCorkle, who was a smart son of a Camelite preacher, thought I was going to say something else. Was reciting in the darkness of the French restaurant out there the night of the reunion, Chaucer. And I thought, I didn't recognize much of it because I never did learn it. But I walked by Miss Davis and I said, Miss Davis, do you know what that reminds me of? She said, I certainly do. Remind you that you took summer school so you wouldn't have to learn. I don't think she ever forgave me for that. Let me tell you about this reel that Winston mentioned. Don Post works for us, and Don and his little brother had been caring for this metal canister of a film thing that Seth Post, their father, had salvaged from the debris of the Plaza Theater, and where Seth's brother had worked when he was after school. So no one knew what was in that canister until about 2 or 3 years ago, when they decided they were going to break in and find out. So they opened the canister and found the film in perfect shape. And it had been in an outhouse in the weather, and it was used. Lee found out a way to get the DVD taken off of it, and when we found out Winston was smart enough, he already knew, so he took some more of them. But had it not been for the Post brothers, we wouldn't have had that picture. But every movie that was shown during the war, you spent about 5 or 10 or 15 minutes seeing pictures of what battles were being fought at that time, and you were looking forward to being a part of the defense of this country. And everybody, if you were in high school and you were not 18, if you were 18, you'd be drafted. If you wanted to go into a special service, you would volunteer before 18. I volunteered with Robert Lee Jolly at 17. He was going to be 18 a month later than I. So we went to Bowling Green 3 different times to talk to the recruiting sergeant. And the recruiting sergeant saw my glasses and he took them off immediately and said, what can you see here? Let me check your eyes. And before we walked out of there for the 3rd time, he was convincing me that in 6 months I would be a pilot in the Navy, piloting sorties over all these battles. I got the papers on the day before my 18th birthday, presented them as a surprise to my mother and father, and they didn't think much of it. So they didn't sign the papers. When I was drafted, I went to Louisville, and I was an acting corporal in charge of 2 bus loads of draftees from Barron and Allen and adjoining counties. And we opened the door of the bus in Louisville. Who was standing there? None other than the recruiting sergeant from Bowling Green, who had been transferred. His eyes brightened, and he said, "Lessenberry, who you want to go with you?" And I said the last thing my dad said to me before he would get out from in front of the bus: do nothing to get in the Marines. And you know he didn't take me in the Marines. I got to go to the infantry.
Thank you so very much.
guys very, very much. I really appreciate it. I know everybody enjoyed
When
it.
can we come back?
Anytime you want to. Okay, just one announcement. The plant board, bless their heart, thanks to Aaron, did videotape this evening. And if you would like a tape or a DVD, I'm still back to VCR days, but if you'd like a DVD, call up there. They are $14.71 with tax, and they'll make you a copy. Just call and place an order, and you can run out and get it. I think this is a keeper program. So thank you much. I'm glad to see everybody here, and I know you enjoyed it. One more hand for them.
Have you or a loved one participated in a local event filmed by the Glasgow EPB? Maybe it was a school graduation, Little League championship, or a musical performance. These are all events that have recently been professionally captured on video by the EPB to be aired on Channel 6. The EPB archives contain community, school, and church events dating back to 1990 and can be purchased by anyone. DVDs are $13 and would make a great gift for family and friends while preserving a timeless memory of a special moment in one's life. Call to place your order today.